Almost Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Welcome back. Today is wear your favorite spring or floral patterned shirt at the Jewish home. So if you've been following our weekly Chassidut study, you might notice that my wardrobe looks a little different this week.
It's also floral pattern at my place too. You can see.
Great. So we're going to study a text together from Sfat Emet. That's usually a text that Danny brings. But this week, let's just be honest, I looked through the other stuff and some of the selections were way too long in the other book or just not compelling. So this one was quite compelling. So we're going to study this one. Sfat Emet is, Danny, you know a little bit more about him, but he's much later, right? He's not one of these early generation mystics that we usually study. He lives in the 20th century.
I think he dies in the very early 20th century.
Okay.
So he's in what we would consider this modern period.
Yeah. So, yeah, but still, thinks within this kind of mystical framework, and often has pretty interesting things to say. So I'm not as familiar with his work. And I've studied some of it in the group together and some of it outside, but this one is a good one. So this week is about it's about a lot of things, but one of the things that it's about is the idea of those distracting thoughts that we often think about in these mystical study sessions. What do you do with those distracting thoughts when they distract you during prayer or distract you during your day? How can you continue to worship God while these distracting thoughts are happening? So he's going to have an interesting take on it. And I think it's pretty worthwhile to think about. So his jumping off point is from this week's Torah portion, this week's Parshah, Tzav, and it's about the eternal flame that is constantly burning on the altar in the tabernacle. We might know in the Mishkan. So we might know that or be familiar with that within our own sanctuaries, right? We have a Ner Tamid, the eternal flame that kind of is above usually the ark and is always on. And so that's kind of the synagogue parallel. But here, this is the original source is about the sacrifices. He then in this first paragraph also quotes a couple of other verses, which I didn't totally get how they're connected to the end teaching. So maybe Gio and Danny, after we've studied it, we can go back. But there are things about love in here too, but the verses aren't exactly connected. I don't know. Okay, so a fire must always burn. It may not go out. The Midrash begins by quoting, "Love covers all sins." Scripture elsewhere says, "Great waters cannot douse love." So these verses are telling us something about how love has this capacity to kind of incorporate or drown out or not be overpowered by other things, whether it is sin or water. Within the biblical mindset, water is also kind of seen as this kind of antithetical sea monster bad thing. But that's for another session at another time. Not for now. Anyways, okay, so let us begin with the second paragraph. In the soul of every Jew, there lies a hidden point that is aflame with love of God, a fire that cannot be put out. Even though it may not go out here, refers to a prohibition, it is also a promise. So he's saying one major point in these first two sentences. The major point is that there is some piece within us that is constantly lit, always aflame, and that is connected to God.
I find that reframing of it not just as a commandment, but as a promise Really powerful, actually.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the external fire, I guess, you're commanded not to put out, but the internal fire that we each have, it seems like in his reading, God's saying, I won't ever let that be extinguished from you. I think that's really beautiful.
Great. Yeah, that's also, it's always helpful to take a step back and be like, right, this is always what Chassidut does. You think it's an external commandment about something out there in the world. Well, it was or it is, but you don't fully understand it. It's also an internal one, right? Yeah, I totally just skipped that because it's like so second nature to me when I'm studying it. Yeah, no, that's a huge move, right? We're talking about a fire on the altar, and now we've transformed it into the soul of every Jew.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's the verse. I mean, not that the Hebrew necessarily, it doesn't help, but it says the fire does not go out. So I mean, in the context, it means do not put it out, but you could also read it as, and it does not, do not, I don't know, how would you, it's like, lo tichbeh, it does not go out, or it ceases to, I don't know exactly how to phrase it, but
I guess I could think of it as two ways. One, I don't know if this is exactly what you're getting at, Avery, but do not put it out.
Right, that's
or it will not be put out.
Yeah. Right, the force of it is left up to the interpreter.
Right.
All it just says in the Hebrew is not go out. And so the context is that, it shouldn't go out. Don't let that fire go out. Or you could say, it does not go out. It's kind of the same, reading the same words, but just putting in a different kind of texture wrinkle to it. Okay. Any other thoughts on these first two lines? Cool. All right.
It is
so,
interesting.
Yeah,
I do have one. I find
Great.
it interesting that it's a promise, not an extra prohibition. Right? Like it would make perfect sense if he had said, yes, it's a internal thing, and you're not to let your internal flame go out.
Right. Yeah. No. He's not only rereading it from the external to the internal, but from a prohibition to a promise.
Yeah, or almost like a prohibition for us to like a prohibition for God. Like God isn't allowed to let it go out.
Right. Yeah, that's neat. Correct. If it's a promise, it means who is upholding that promise, presumably God. Yeah. Yeah. No, the mystics are always awesome at flipping everything on its head. Neat. Okay, so thus our sages said, even though, so this is a line from the Talmud Bavli in the Tractate of Yoma. So even though fire descends from the heavens, it is a commandment to bring it from a common or from a human source. The same is true of the human soul. There needs to burn in it a fiery longing to worship the Creator, and this longing has to be renewed each day. As we read, the priest shall burn wood upon it each morning.
Yeah, I guess that brings up for me another aspect of the fire analogy, which I hadn't thought of, which is that if it really is a fire within us, if we take that seriously, you don't just start a fire and then it burns forever. It takes actual work and maintenance and attention in order to keep it burning. So this makes me think, what does that look like, for me internally, for this kind of internal flame? What do I do and what should I do and what do I have to do in order to make that, a healthy, robust fire?
Right, it's great because it connects to kind of what Gio was saying previously. It's like, wait, maybe this should have been about a prohibition and to us that we got to keep it aflame. So he's saying, actually, yeah, that too. There is this flame that's there in you, and it's not going to get extinguished at all. God's promise that it's going to constantly be there, but you also need to bring something of yourself. A context. So the line from the Talmud it's talking about various miracles that happened in the Mikdash, in, I think, the first temple. And so one of them was that fire from heavens would come and consume the sacrifices. And so the Talmud then discusses, like, well, if the fires are coming from the heavens, then, like, did the humans have to do anything? Like, did the priests? And they're like, yes, they still had to do it. And so, like, the mystical eye would be like, ooh, okay, even though there's some heavenly, godly force above that's doing something, there's still a requirement of the humans from below to also act as well.
Right. It sounds like the classical Kabbalistic arousal from below leading to arousal above.
Exactly.
Though he doesn't here say it as a condition, but it could be.
Even though, I mean, I'm just taking the line from the top, even though the fire descends from heavens, it is a commandment to bring it. You got to bring it as well.
But it doesn't say what the order is.
Right, that's true. Yeah,
like, it doesn't say when you bring the fire will come down. It could be, I know there's already a fire coming down, add to it yourself, which could be taking all kinds of different theological statements about the world. Those two different ways.
Yeah.
The thing that this makes me think of is how in our culture we often neglect to think about how spiritual growth, as well as emotional and intellectual to a lesser degree, but some, like, you have to work at it, right? It's not something that just happens.
Right.
The comparison that I'll give often is, like, if someone said, oh, I'm just going to go to the gym once a year and I'm going to be in great shape, and you look at them like they were crazy. Right. But if someone says, like, I went to synagogue one time and I didn't feel anything spiritual, and it's like, well, are you not noticing that disconnect? Like, it's is something that on occasion will just happen, but generally it's not. It's something you have to work at. You have to bring wood to this fire regularly, just like with a relationship with another person as well.
Right, nice. That's a good analogy. I like the gym analogy, especially since the gym has been closed in the last week.
I'm going the same amount I was before.
Yeah, and so that quote, the priest shall burn wood upon it each morning. Each morning is from these section of these verses in the beginning of chapter 6 about the eternal light or flame that's going on the altar.
Why is each morning repeated?
I mean, it's poetic, but then obviously you can take it however you want. But it's to say every morning you got to do it. I'm sure there are other good drashes on why it says each morning.
In case you missed it, each morning.
Yes.
Meant that.
Yeah.
Which again isn't a good enough answer for the mystics.
Yeah. Yeah. And we see the newness or the renewing. I mean, we know that from our own, the own daily prayers in the morning, that God renews the world each day. So it's neat to think. I mean, obviously, if God is doing it, all the more so that we need to do it too. Okay. And so lest you thought that this was just dealing with priests, he's going to democratize it and tell you that it's about everyone. Everyone who worships God may be called a priest, because the Hebrew word priest, kohen, is one who serves. So in the mystical kind of concept, anyone who serves. And this arousal of love in Israel's hearts is the service of the heart, that which takes place of sacrificial offerings. And so lest you thought we were just talking about sacrifices that only existed in ancient time, that was then. But now we're talking about the service of the heart. That is going to take place of the sacrifices.
in the Kabbalistic tradition, the priests, the Kohanim, are associated with the right side, with the side of Chesed, of loving kindness. So I think this plays into that as well, because it's your priestly duty to feed that passionate fire of love.
I like this reading a lot. I think similar to what you're saying. Every year around this time, I have such a hard time teaching the Parsha to kids, starting from here on out. Because, there's only so much you can say about the laws of sacrifice that'll be meaningful to somebody who's 8 or somebody who's an adult. And this reframing of it as not just about something that, people used to do historically, but about something that we do within our hearts as a spiritual practice, I find very helpful. Just in thinking about what the meaning of this stuff actually is, which can feel so removed from anything worthwhile in my life.
Mm-hmm. And that move has been happening. I mean, the Jews who live without a temple are like, wait, how do we do this? Oh, okay. The sacrifices are going to correspond to the daily prayer services, which is also a kind of a service of the heart. And I think here he's taking it a step further, that he's going from sacrifices to prayer. I mean, I'll get to prayer in a second, but now it's even a more, not abstract, more internal process.
Yeah.
Right. If we haven't even gotten to prayer yet, right? This is before you even get to those external actions, such as prayer, to the extent that it can be said to be external. You're heaping on all this wood in preparation ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
That presumably at this point doesn't even necessarily have anything to do with prayer or anything to do with mitzvot or anything else.
Right. It's about keeping that, I guess, point in the soul that you have alive that is, I guess, in connection with God or loving God.
Mm-hmm.
Neat. Let's scroll to the next paragraph. Okay, we'll read the first and then we'll zoom in a little bit. Okay, so when this fiery love is present, any distracting thought that enters the heart is consumed. Thus, the Holy Zohar says that the evil thought is the burnt offering upon its altar. That, in fact, is the true purpose of all those thoughts that rise up within the heart. They are there to be overpowered in the fire of worship. In this way, those distracting thoughts are purified and uplifted. So if you prepared this fiery love inside of you and this connection to God, I guess the moment then that you are, I don't really know, I think he's saying the distracting thoughts, I think maybe they're just happening at any point, but maybe let's say specifically in prayer or when performing a mitzvah. These, you could just imagine it like those like lights or those sticky things that like the bugs get zapped to. That's the way. Just like totally gets consumed. Like whatever you've built up on the inside, those distracting thoughts, like they're just gonna get totally consumed, and they're purified and uplifted through your internal eternal flame.
That's so radical for Judaism. Like, this is one of those times where I read a Hasidic text and I'm like, wait, so am I reading a Christian text? Like, because it feels, if you take just this paragraph at least and ignore the previous one, it feels like, as long as you've accepted Jesus, you're forgiven for your sins type of logic. the part that brings it back to Judaism is that previous part of the paragraph where it says you have to constantly be building to this fire, right? It's not just, well, yeah, you achieved the fire, so therefore anything you do is just forgiven immediately. It's no. You're continuing to work on that fire, which is what gives you that, which is still radical, but not quite as radical.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's also pretty amazing about it is, I don't know, because often when you think about these machshavot zarot, these distracting thoughts, in the many interpretations and readings that I've read about it, it's like, okay, so how do you take them and how do you break them down and how do you switch them around and how do you see the holiness that's in it? And here it's like, actually, they're going to become like a part of your fire. Mm-hmm. They're totally consumed in it, which is not a take that I've seen before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this makes me think, I guess I have one thought and one question. The thought being that when you put something into a fire and it's consumed in the fire, it also feeds the fire. It becomes more fuel for the fire.
Yeah.
So these thoughts aren't just being burnt and purified. They're also actually contributing to your growth and maintenance of the fire, which feels like, really radical.
Like read the next paragraph.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but keep on going. Yeah, he's gonna get there.
I wrote this book. The spot I meant is a pen name.
That's why you always bring it.
But he's gonna end up saying that. It's that like these are actually a part of your prayer.
Wow, that's wild.
Right.
The question I have is he says that this burning up is the true purpose of all of these foreign thoughts. So they exist in order to be nullified in the fire, which seems really interesting to me. Like, why not just not exist in the first place if they seem to only exist in order to be burnt? So this also goes to, I guess, what Abe you're saying we're going to see next. There's got to be some deeper purpose to them than just coming into being in order to burn. But I can't quite pin down what that is.
Right. There's a compassion in here that we see in these types of texts from time to time for the struggle, right? This is not something where you should say, oh, I can't concentrate and beat yourself up about it, right? This isn't like, I keep having these thoughts about X, I'm a terrible person, right? This is lifting up and saying, no, that's not the case. Like, you're supposed to have these thoughts, and actually, like, there's a benefit. This isn't push away the thought. This isn't try to make yourself not think it. This is like a radical acceptance. Like, I'm accepting that I'm having this thought and I'm turning it to positive. It's powerful.
Yeah. Let's look at the next paragraph because I think it's going to tie all these thoughts together.
Great.
All right, let me just move this over so I see. Okay, so just the context, because I didn't give you all the verses, is that this fire needs to continue to burn. The priest has got to bring the wood to, each morning. And then the end of that verse, I think maybe it's in verse 6 or so, it's that the fire is going to burn all night until the morning. Okay. On this face of it, it should burn a long time, the whole night. But they're going to make something of it. So that is the reason it says all night until the morning. The phrase appears redundant. Why until the morning if we already said all night? But this is to show that the very admixture of distractions and their darkness in the worshiper's heart will itself bring about the morning. You need to have the darkness in order to get to the morning. There was evening and there was morning, right? That's the Genesis 1 line. The mixture of good and evil is purified. Weekday prepares for Shabbat. The world prepares for the world to come. So too, the struggle in the heart of the one who serves goes on all night until the morning. Our exile is also called night, but it too will bring about a morning. So I mean, Danny, that's why, because that he said, I mean, but I'd love to hear what you're thinking, is that oh my gosh, like, why are these distracting thoughts coming? No. Or why are they even, no, they're needed in order for you to have a more complete and perfect prayer. Because you can't get to the morning, you can't get to the light, you can't get to, fill in your blank positive without the distracting thoughts, without the darkness.
I find this very comforting.
Mm-hmm.
The struggle in the heart of the one who serves goes on all night until the morning. We have this idea that I think it's hard not to internalize sometimes, that what faith really means is not struggling and not having these doubts and just believing that things are for the best. And I think this is a powerful rebuttal of that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, no, the struggle in the heart is actually not separate from your service of God. It's the essential part of it. And I think that's really, really beautiful.
Right. And if you right, essential, and it's a part of the process. If you jump to the end of it, you actually can't jump to the end of it.
You can't, right.
And it's not just that the fire will go on, right, which is where it started, right, with the verse from this Parsha. It's the struggle will go on. So, like, you're struggling. I know it's difficult, and that's life, and that's like, there's a piece of like, that's, you're alive, you're doing something, because it's not easy, because it's not ended. This text and a lot of these Hasidic texts, in a way, feel so real to me, right? Because they're not saying, let's forget about the darkness, everything's light, everything should be perfect, everything should be complete and total faith. They're acknowledging the reality. You're gonna struggle, you're gonna have crises of faith, and that's okay, and that's not only unavoidable but necessary part of being alive and being human.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. As you were saying, right. It's not just okay, it's necessary.
Yeah.
Right.
Can we just go back to those verses? Because I still don't understand I think I understood how the verses connected, but I don't really. So a fire must always burn. It may not go out. So that was his explanation. He reinterpreted that as that there's this eternal flame and it's a promise. It will always be there. And then he goes on to that you need to build it, etc. But the Midrash begins by quoting, love covers over all sins. So I think what he's saying here is that when you build, because he talked about it as love, that eternal flame that has a love of God, it's going to cover up all of the sins. I think is he saying sins are to the distracting thoughts?
Because you have built up this fire of love, it consumes those thoughts, those things that
Right.
might be calling sins. But then what's the great waters cannot douse love?
It's that whatever so that's where the distractions are. Great waters, right? You have a fire and you pour great water on it, it's gonna go out, but actually it's not.
Not this fire.
Not right. This fire actually needs water to continue to burn.
Yeah, this fire, the water actually is fuel for this fire.
Great. Okay, awesome. So water is the distracting thoughts. The love is that eternal flame. He didn't really talk about sinning here, but
the sin feels a little bit out of left field.
Yeah.
I think the way it makes sense to me to make sense of it is to read sin as the distracting thoughts, but the love, consumes them. But that doesn't feel to me like a helpful language for this, at least in this context.
Let me look up the verse to see.
So, I mean, I think The distracting thought, right? I think we maybe need to remove our concepts of sin that we personally have in our day and age and in our various cultures from that. So I think that within his world, there is a certain view. Why am I having this distracting thought? It's because I'm a sinner. It's because I'm sinning. If I were holy enough, if I were good enough, I would be able to concentrate on my prayer. And I think there's a certain non-Hasidic view that views distracting thoughts as sins. Right? There's the line in Pirkei Avot that if you stop from your studying for a single second to notice that there's a beautiful tree, then you're deserving of death. Right? This idea of like you should be absolutely fully concentrating, and any mistake from that is terrible. I think he's reacting to that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm also thinking about how to read sin here. If sin is not a thing that you do, or a bad thing that you do, but is a way that you alienate yourself from God,
Mm-hmm.
then it makes sense to me to say that without this fire, these distracting thoughts are sins, right? Because they're moments of alienation, of disconnection from your relationship with the divine. But because of the fire that we have in our hearts, these things that would otherwise be sins, that would otherwise pull us away from our faith, from our love of God, from our worship, whatever the case may be,
Mm-hmm.
they actually don't have that effect. The fire, the love covers the sin, and it keeps it from being that in some sense. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm just thinking out
No,
loud.
I like that. I think that's great. Right. Without the love, if you don't build love or a connection to God, a sense of however you want to translate it, sins are going to constantly pull you away from a spiritual mindset, from a connection to God.
Mm-hmm.
But if you maintain that grounding, that flame, then even the sins will, of course, the sins are still going to be there, but they're going to be channeled, redirected, used as to continue to connect you to God.
Right. They won't pull you away. There'll be more opportunities for connection.
Yeah.
Robbie, maybe you were going to look something up. Did you find it?
Yeah, it doesn't help us. Just
okay.
Yeah. Let's look at Art Green's
Great.
His little take on it. So we long for a perfect act of worship, one in which there is no distraction, no doubt, no holding back, no wandering of the mind, nothing but the pure gift of love. But we miss the point. Our worship is all about struggle, an ongoing inner process of transformation. Indeed, there is pure fire of love in our hearts, but it is there in order to meet and consume our lower passions, our distractions, all those thoughts that seem such unwelcome guests in our hearts when we try to pray. But their presence is the very point of prayer.
Wow.
They, or the we, the self who is represented by them, come to us in that moment in order to be consumed, to be taken up into that secret fire that burns within us.
Wow.
Yeah. It's
powerful.
Yeah. And I'm finding that especially powerful. I mean, just in this time, which I know we're all experiencing in different ways, where I've simultaneously, just in my own spiritual life, been pulled more towards some of the traditional forms of Jewish prayer. I've been davening more with talis and tefillin lately because I've been finding that structure, really comforting. And at the same time, so many distractions constantly. And so just, I'm finding this helpful just thinking about this in my own life right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the difficulty, the darkness, the potential despair that can arise in this situation, um, you know, it can be really easy for one to get sucked into that and to dwell that, to let that undermine any sense of positivity or progress. And this is saying, no, 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 you're going to have that moment, and you can use that to feed a better flame, and you can use that to grow.
Yeah. Nice.
Sweet.
Well, yasher koach, everyone.
Yasher koach. That was
a nice
great,
one.
Avi.
Thank you, Abby.
Yeah, I'm glad I have that copy of that book at home.
Mm-hmm.
Crack it open from
That's
time.
right.
All right, wonderful.
If anybody is interested, it's called The Language of Truth.
Yes.
By Arthur Green. It's this translation of a bunch of the Sfat Emet's work. So thank you to everyone who has tuned in. Be well. Good Shabbos. Chag Sameach.
Yeah.
Wow.
Be well.
All right. Good Shabbos.